All right, Sunday, 7:13, 80 degrees in the office, 86 outside. Should be preparing to have our orchard photographed from space with hyperspectral cameras, but we're not doing that because it is thunderstorms and I can't geotag all the trees. So what we'll do instead, because it's thunderstorms, is I'm going to focus this day on potentially dealing with fire blight. I've noticed a lot of new strikes showing up in my young high density plantings over the last week because we're getting incredibly hot weather. The trees are moving. I'm noticing more growth than usual. And with that and additional rain and potentially thunderstorms, we even need to start talking about what to do when hail happens as well. And if you do fire blight, fire blight, do you need to submit it for resistance testing? Yes or no? That type of stuff is happening, and there's still opportunities for doing that as well. So what we'll start with is talking about post-bloom. At this point, you should be working on a low fixed rate copper program, 7 to 10 day schedule until you hit terminal bud set. And you might be saying, I keep doing this all the time, and it never seems to end. You won't need to stop doing it until the trees quit growing, if they ever quit growing. We need to hit that terminal bud. Be very careful with this. Very dilute, high volumes. Don't really put a lot of copper in low volume sprays. Concentrated, that's when, with these slow drying conditions and thunderstorms, you'll have a chance of injuring that fruit finish. It can cause russet if you're doing nursery or it's just establishment. Yeah, it's fine. Just make sure you get adequate drying time. In many cases, I've just been doing the biologicals. Some of the copper products I've been using all summer long. Haven't had any trouble. It's usually the liquid ones. Low MCE liquid coppers seem to do the best in this particular situation. It's a protectant, so why do you have to keep doing it every 7 to 10 days? Because the terminals are outgrowing the copper residues, and then there's no coverage of that terminal. It's only going to protect against surface infections. Once it's inside, you're not really getting protection. That's why I and you potentially can keep seeing new fire blight show up, even though we're spraying the surfaces for fire blight. We want those terminals covered for the storms that we're potentially having today. Those terminals will outgrow the protective residues on copper. I usually focus on the liquid coppers, low MCE, and I try to avoid adjuvants because we don't want to hurt the fruit, but we just want to protect any type of infections occurring from branches rubbing together, ooze droplets getting flung around, and then potentially hitting something that's touching a wire or whatnot. Now, do you prune? We've already talked about that a little bit, but if you are going to do it, I don't know, maybe tomorrow morning if there's no rain is the time to do it, because after a thunderstorm it gets cool, but you want it to be dry. You don't want it to be a wet mess. This is where things get dangerous pretty quickly. Cut into last year's growth, at least 12 inches, maybe even more. What I'm recommending now, based on all of our studies, is going all the way into third year tissue. With each year of tissue of growth, it's just harder for fire blight to make its way down through the vascular tissue to the central leader. Sometimes flush straight to a short stump and just remove the scaffold if you don't need it is the best plan. Now, if you are seeing newly developed strikes and you're thinking about pruning them, if you're in a young tree and fire blight reaches the main scaffold, it's time to just give up, remove, and replant it. It's going to be a lost cause. Soon I'm getting set up to take you into the orchard and show you different things. And you'll see situations where I attempted to leave a tree that had fire blight in the scaffolds. Is it dead? No. Is it productive? Absolutely not. Is the tree I planted 2 years later already hit the top wire? Yes. So in this case, you're better off removing and replanting. But we can see that in the future in some of the blocks. 1 to 2 year old tree, active glowing high density trees, I don't know if you can salvage them. We've learned over the last couple of years that even by doing a careful inoculation of just one shoot on a tree, that in 3 to 5 days in weather like we're currently having, 85 and storms of rain, stuff is just moving through like a water slide at a theme park. And then the little fire blight bacterium are in the little floating cushions. They're just flying through these things like a water slide. 3 to 5 days, the whole tree is wiped out. Bigger, older trees, I'd say older high-density trees after about year 4 or 5, probably going to be just fine pruning these things out. Now, if we see fire blight, if it's dry, it's been dry conditions. It has been fairly dry. We're just getting a couple storms and things. If it rains and dries out really quickly, and you don't think the tissues are actively growing and really pushing, and you're in a drought period, and just apply the perhexadione calcium, low liquid MCE copper. I feel like this copper product, especially the salt ones, will help dry out those tissue. Dryness is the greatest enemy of fire blight. It loves wet, succulent tissues. Now, if you have a bunch of oozing stuff, it's kind of scary. Like again, we're going to need higher rates if the weather is drier and the trees aren't moving as fast. If they're still growing a little bit, you can get by with lower rates, but I feel like in this weather, my trees aren't really responding that much to perhexadione calcium, apogee kudos, and you just put on the big 12 ounces, then plus the low liquid copper to kind of protect the other shoots on the tree and in the block, and dry those tissues out. Wait 5 days, prune, and then re-put on that perhexadione calcium. If you don't have any fire blight at all, but you're scared to death because you just had a hailstorm, or something or you've done what I've done. Unfortunately, we got hot weather and a bunch of storms, and I just had my one of my high density blocks hedged. And we'll talk a little bit about what to do in those situations as well. No fire blight, but you're scared to death because you just hedged your planting or did summer pruning. Low liquid MCE copper or a liquid biopesticide. Really? Just a liquid biopesticide? I'll show you some data in a minute that talks about how that actually ends up working. And it actually, even those biopesticides right after a hedging event can do well. And you might ask, what did I do? I'm going to go non-bearing, and I'm just going to put on strep and low MCE copper in that particular instance. Are my fruit all scratched up and ugly? Not yet. We'll see next week if I can get that camera in the orchard. But now that it's constantly storming, it's a little more challenging. What about trauma blight? What if hail shows up? What if I see lightning bolts on little symbols on the Weather Channel everywhere? That could mean hail, particularly with hot and going to cool conditions pretty quickly. Atmospheric trouble can occur, and then we might get a hailstorm. Now, is it always hail that are going to damage your crop? Let's just say the deer fence falls down and a herd of angry deer comes rampaging through. You're going to want to deal with trauma blight the same way. Here's some gorgeous pictures of devastating hail that we experienced in western New York not too long ago. Maybe it has been more than 10 years. You never know. Anyway, if you are in this situation, you look out and you think, well, the crop is lost, but streptomycin-resistant Erwinia or fire blight has not been found on my farm. Go streptomycin, Regulate. You're really rolling off the non-bearing crop allowance thing. You're not selling this fruit. You're not using it for anything else. You're throwing in the towel. You're not going to harvest it. That'd be an incredible waste of money. Do that. If the crop is lost and you've got streptomycin-resistant Erwinia malabra on the farm, just apply the liquid copper product of your choice or biological, and then move on. If you have a very sensitive crop to copper and it is salvageable, the crop, like maybe a couple fruit are hurt, but not everything, and you just don't want to wreck it all, just use a liquid biopesticide depending on how sensitive the crop is, with or without copper. And you might ask, how well could that possibly work? Well, surprisingly well. So way back in 2017, 2018, we did a study funded by the Apple Research and Development Program. New York growers paid for this. And we looked at the risk of shoot blight infection following mechanical hedging and mechanical thinning with or without post-hedging bactericide applications. We're not going to talk about the thinning one, but I'll talk about the others. We went into our 13 to 14-year-old Gala and Ida Red plantings on B9. Big nasty trees, get tons of fire blight in them. I went out and inoculated them just around 20% king bloom at that particular point because we wanted to do thinning. And some of the thinning treatments happen around king bloom. But we're going to talk about the hedging component of that. I dumped a bunch of fire blight on them, and they got really grossly infected, I learned later. And then we did all the mechanical thinning, and then at full pink king bloom. And so we just covered them with stuff and just ran the thinner right through it. I meticulously cleaned the thinner and the equipment afterwards because that's pretty bad. But the one I want to talk about is hedging at mid-July, which is kind of now, and again in the first week in August. The first week in August, we'd really hit that terminal bud set, and you're going to see how much of a difference that makes. So we had a bunch of different treatments. The first thinning and hedging treatments, they're all the same treatments, but we're going to focus on the hedging. We did mechanical hedging untreated. They got inoculated. There's no control of fire blight. Second one was we did the hedging. Then we made an application of streptomycin. We had streptomycin 17 at the full rate, and if it's 50, you're going to roughly be about a third of that. And then after that, I just did a biological. I didn't even get to pick to use my fancy liquid biologicals. At the time, we just had Serenade Opti. Fantastic material. It's just a powder. I find that the liquids ones work even better. So you could imagine in your mind potentially the results of the study turning out a little better than normal. And then finally, we just did non-mechanized, non-treated, and we just let fire blight develop normally. They were not inoculated at all. So no control of fire blight. And we actually put fire blight on them, never mind, but we did not traumatize them with any mechanical treatment whatsoever. So no mechanization, no treated. You'll just see how the fire blight spreads normally down the plot. Okay, so that's sort of a schematic of the plot. We had clean rows, we had inoculated rows, and we would come through and we would do our thinner, our hedger, and the first tree definitely had active fire blight in it, and it was inoculated with thinning, but when we did the hedging, you could see fire blight in there, and then we simply ran the hedger through that tree and all the way down the row. And then afterwards, we came back and we did our biological or our streptomycin, and then we rated the fire blight spread down the orchard rows. And we had a lot of replicated rows and whatnot. But this is what happened. So after 2 weeks, we watched it, and I'm going to go back in my own block after hedging and see how well we did, because we hedged them well. But that was the reason we hedged them, is because we need that fruiting wall for horticulture, plus the ability of my UV unit to go through and manage apple scab and all the other fungal diseases. So that fruiting wall seems to be essential for doing over-the-row UV. Makes it real easy. Anyway, so what we end up having is we have distance from the infected tree, and as you can imagine, the infected tree's got high levels of shoot blight. So we're looking at shoot blight now following head and head. Almost 60% of the tree blighted with shoot blight. But 2 weeks later, we measured that distance out. And some of the nice things, if you did hedging with just no treatment whatsoever, up to almost 50 meters down the plot, you are finding like 15% shoot blight. It was pretty intense in these Ida Reds and 2017s. Now, if we drop streptomycin in there, you got a quick drop off of that spread, and by about 20 meters, it's practically gone. All of it was managed. Interestingly enough, similarly, just using the biopesticide on it whatsoever was about as enough to reduce it to no mechanical hedging and no management, bringing that last little bit of dip, last maybe 1 or 2 strikes, 5%, at about 30 meters, and it completely petered off. So that was pretty well. Ida Red's pretty susceptible. And then in 2018, looked a little bit better, a little bit easier year. Hedging and doing nothing is very dangerous. You get spread out to about 50 meters or more. Hedging with streptomycin is very easy. Get it knocked about down to 20. And a biopesticide in 2018 was almost the same as streptomycin, bringing it out about 5% at about 20 meters versus like 1 to 2%. So it's entirely possible. What about August? Well, in August, all that seemed to happen were after terminal bud set. If there was fire blight in the plot, we just seemed to cut it out in that particular instance. So hedging in August is definitely not bad. And it was after terminal bud set, and you can't really see that it mattered that I made any treatments. If the trees have stopped growing, the fire blight will stop infecting. If they're active in August, you need to probably do the same thing that we did in mid-July. Use even a biological is fine. And in that case, your fruit aren't illegal to sell because those biologicals are labeled for just about everything. You might ask yourself, in 2018, even better, nothing. We'd hit that terminal bud set in early August, and you could thin and hedge without much worry. And this was a highly susceptible variety. These Ida Reds really melt. Galos are pretty susceptible too. Why didn't I ever talk about the Gala? Because there's no shoot blight ever developed following hedging whatsoever. It was just in that first tree, no spread down the row, looking fantastic. Ida Red, really high level of infections. If you're hedging in a block, both of them had active shoot blight. If it's a highly susceptible block, you're going to need to put something on afterwards. But if it's not that susceptible of a block and you're still worried, you could still probably put on a biological and get away with it. Yeah, with active shoot blight was much more increased in the Ida Reds. What else did we learn? The streptomycin application afterwards will save the day. And in many blocks, particularly if they're not just going to melt under fire blight, you're going to be great. And greatly reduce the incidence of shoot blight. And if you're hedging in early August, after terminal bud set, you seem to be fine. So I think we have the tools that we need in order to manage these particular fire blight infections. We're going to talk next week about the survey, how it's happening this year compared to others, and how to best submit samples for antibiotic resistance testing. Should you see shoot blight in the coming days? Should you shoot blight? Yep, that's it's almost a tongue twister if you get it too many SH sounds. Yeah, my producer Kelsey is gonna love cutting that one out. Anyway, all right, on the podcast, I'll see you next week, and we're gonna talk about the survey and how to submit samples, because we got a few trickling in, but I suspect with this hot weather and these thunderstorms, we might see a few more. Scout for active new shoots and high density orchards. I'm seeing them now in mine. You could be seeing them in yours as well. And if you do hedge, do some repruning, put something on afterwards, and it doesn't have to be streptomycin. It can be a biological. Even a biological that you're using for a summer disease cover gives you that double duty of doing both fungi and bacteria. The fungicides only do fungi, the hardcore ones, but those biologicals will give you a little bit of A and B. Happens to be any ooze or anything out there, or rubbing or any other type of injury. All right, we'll see you next week.